In a small, peaceful town nestled between thick, whispering forests, there lived a woman who captivated everyone's attention, Sister Isabel. The town was quiet, with simple folks going about their daily lives, but Isabel stood apart. Revered yet mysterious, whispers of her spread through the streets, but her story was one no one dared to uncover. Her presence was calming, almost ethereal. People respected her not for grand speeches or sermons, but for the quiet strength she carried with her. Her past was a shadow, always out of reach, and though many speculated about who she was and what had shaped her, no one dared to ask. But fate works in strange ways. One day, a chance encounter would alter everything. A grieving soul would find solace in her silence, and secrets long buried would begin to surface. This encounter would not only change Sister Isabel's life, but also bring healing to a broken heart. What followed would uncover mysteries, stir emotions, and ultimately reveal the profound power of quiet presence in a world filled with noise. The town was a picture of serenity, nestled in the embrace of towering trees that seemed to hold ancient secrets within their boughs. Its quiet streets and gentle atmosphere made it the perfect place for those seeking peace. At the very edge of the town stood a small convent, modest in structure, but warm and inviting. Its stone walls held the quiet strength of a place that had withstood the test of time. Inside, the scent of aged wood and herbs lingered in the air, and the soft flicker of candlelight could always be seen through the windows, offering a glimpse into the serene life of Sister Isabel. Unlike the other nuns at the convent, known for their devotion to prayer and their eloquent sermons, Sister Isabel lived a quieter life. She didn't seek attention, nor did she stand before the congregation delivering speeches. In fact, Sister Isabel rarely spoke. Yet, when she did, it was with an unspoken wisdom that left people in awe. Her words, though few, carried weight, but it was her silence that truly set her apart. What she was known for most wasn't what she said, but rather how she listened. People came to her with their troubles, their grief, their confusion, and instead of rushing to offer advice or solutions, she would simply listen. She gave them the space to speak, the time to untangle their thoughts, and in doing so, allowed them to find their own answers. There was a quiet magic in her presence, a peace that seemed to fill the air when she was near. For many, it was more than they had ever experienced before. In a world that often feels too loud and too rushed, Sister Isabel's ability to be still was a balm for their weary souls. But though she exuded calm, she wasn't without her own secrets. For years, Sister Isabel had worked in solitude, tending the convent's garden, praying, reading, and meditating in the peaceful seclusion of the convent. She was dedicated to her quiet life, and yet her past remained a mystery. Some said she had joined the convent after losing someone she loved deeply. Others whispered that she had fled from something darker, something she couldn't escape. Whatever the truth was, the town didn't ask. The secrets she carried were hers alone, locked away in her heart, never to be revealed. In the stillness of her life, Sister Isabel found peace, but the world around her was about to shift, and her own hidden story would soon begin to intertwine with those seeking solace at the convent. One quiet morning, as the sun filtered through the trees and bathed the convent's garden in golden light, Sister Isabel was lost in the simple task of tending to the flowers. Her fingers brushed against the delicate petals as she watered them, the soothing rhythm of the work calming her thoughts. It was a peaceful routine she knew well, one that brought her a sense of quiet joy. But today, something unusual caught her attention. A woman was walking down the dusty road that led into town, and she appeared completely out of place. The woman was dressed in dark, plain clothes, her face pale and gaunt, as though she hadn't slept in days. She carried a small suitcase, and despite walking with purpose, there was a hesitation in her every step, as if she were unsure whether to move forward or turn back. Sister Isabel's gaze lingered on the stranger. Her curiosity piqued. There was something about her, a heaviness in her posture, an unmistakable sorrow that seemed to weigh the woman down. It was a look that stirred something deep inside Isabel, a quiet tug that made her want to know more. The woman's sorrow mirrored a pain Isabel had once known all too well. Later that day, Isabel encountered the woman again, this time at the market. The woman, who Isabel would come to know as Lydia, stood at a fruit stall, picking up apples only to put them back, her hands trembling slightly. Her eyes darted nervously, as if she were expecting someone or something to appear at any moment. Isabel could see the unease that radiated from her, and it only deepened the curiosity Isabel felt. Unable to ignore the pull any longer, Isabel approached the woman, her voice soft and gentle, almost a whisper against the noise of the market. "Are you new here?" she asked, her tone inviting but unobtrusive. The woman turned quickly, startled, her eyes wide with surprise. She studied Isabel for a moment, uncertainty flashing across her face. For a long moment, it seemed as if Lydia was deciding whether to trust her. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Yes," Lydia replied in a faint, breathy voice. "I just moved into the cottage near the woods." Isabel's gaze softened as she studied the woman's face. There was something haunting in her eyes, a shadow of pain that reminded Isabel of her own hidden sorrows. "I see," Isabel said quietly, offering her a gentle smile. "I'm Sister Isabel. Welcome to our town." Lydia returned the smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you," she murmured. "I'm Lydia." In that brief exchange, Isabel knew there was more to Lydia's story. A quiet bond formed between them, unspoken but real, and Isabel felt an unshakable sense that their paths had crossed for a reason. The next day, as Sister Isabel went about her daily tasks at the convent, she couldn't shake the thought of Lydia. There was something about her that resonated deeply with Isabel, something familiar. The pain in Lydia's eyes had caught Isabel's attention, and it stirred a memory she had long buried. She recognized that kind of sorrow all too well. It was a silent kind of grief, one that lingers and shapes every movement, every thought. Later that afternoon, as Isabel sat in her small room, quietly reading, a soft knock on the door broke her concentration. Surprised, she rose to answer it. Standing in the doorway was Lydia, her hands nervously clutching a small basket. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," Lydia said hesitantly, glancing down at her feet as if unsure of her welcome. Isabel smiled kindly and stepped aside. "Not at all. Please, come in." Lydia stepped into the convent, her eyes taking in the simple, peaceful surroundings. The flickering candlelight cast gentle shadows, and the air was thick with the scent of herbs and earth. It was a tranquil place, a stark contrast to the world outside. Lydia seemed to relax a little, her tense shoulders softening as she inhaled the calming atmosphere. "I brought some bread and honey," Lydia said, setting the basket on the table. "Just as a thank you." Isabel smiled faintly, moving to prepare tea. "It's very thoughtful of you," she said, as she poured hot water into 2 mugs. "Would you like some tea?" Lydia nodded gratefully and sank into a chair at the table. As they sipped their tea, Isabel noticed the way Lydia's fingers trembled ever so slightly as she held the mug. Isabel, ever patient, allowed the silence to stretch between them. She didn't rush. It was Lydia who finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know what else to bring," Lydia admitted, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I'm not used to this." She paused, taking a deep breath, as though gathering the strength to say more. "You're always welcome here," Isabel replied gently, her voice warm and inviting. Another long pause followed before Lydia spoke again. "My husband passed away recently," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's been hard, adjusting to life without him." Isabel nodded slowly, her heart aching with understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss. Grief can be overwhelming, especially when you're alone." Lydia looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you. It's just, no one really talks about it. People avoid me because they don't know what to say. So, I've been alone with this pain." Isabel reached across the table, her hand gently covering Lydia's. "You're not alone," she said softly. "You're always welcome here." Sometimes, silence speaks louder than words. The room fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was a safe space, a place where Lydia could simply breathe, where the weight of her grief wasn't too much to carry alone. And for the first time in a long while, Lydia felt the smallest flicker of peace. Days turned into weeks, and Lydia found herself returning to the convent again and again. At first, she told herself it was simply to thank Sister Isabel for her kindness. After all, Isabel had given her more than just a safe place to sit. She had given her the space to breathe, the chance to share her grief without fear of judgment. But deep down, Lydia knew it was more than that. The convent had become her sanctuary, a refuge from the relentless weight of her grief. It was a place where she could shed the mask she had worn for so long and simply be without expectation, without the burden of performing some version of herself for others. As the days passed, their conversations began to shift. At first, they had started with small talk, polite exchanges about the weather, the market, and the goings-on in the town. But as time wore on, the walls between them began to fade. Slowly, Lydia found herself revealing more about herself, more than she had ever shared with anyone, not even her late husband. One afternoon, as they sat in the quiet warmth of the convent sitting room, Lydia stared down into her cup of tea, her fingers tracing the rim. Her voice, when she spoke, was almost a whisper. "I wasn't always happy with him," she confessed, her words hanging in the air like a fragile truth she had long kept hidden. "There were times I felt trapped, like I was suffocating. I lost myself in the relationship, and when he passed away, it felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. I was drowning." Sister Isabel remained silent, her gaze steady and patient. She had heard sorrow in many forms over the years, but there was something uniquely raw about Lydia's words. Isabel didn't rush to fill the silence with platitudes or advice. Instead, she simply allowed Lydia the space to speak, to let the burden of her grief spill out into the stillness of the room. The quiet between them was not uncomfortable. It was healing. "Do you regret marrying him?" Isabel's question came softly, without judgment, just an invitation to dig deeper into Lydia's heart. Lydia shook her head slowly, her eyes welling with tears. "No, I don't regret it. I loved him, and we had good moments. But sometimes, I wonder if things could have been different. If I had made other choices, if I had been braver, more myself." Isabel reached across the table, her hand gently resting over Lydia's. It was a small gesture, but it carried a profound sense of understanding. "You'll find yourself again," she said, her voice steady and filled with quiet certainty. "It takes time, but you will." For a moment, Lydia looked up, meeting Isabel's eyes. There was a flicker there, a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't full-fledged hope, but it was the beginning of it, the first crack in the wall that had held her grief in place for so long. She wasn't sure if it was truly possible to heal, if she could ever feel like herself again. But in that moment, the weight on her chest felt a little lighter, and for the first time since her husband's death, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of a future beyond the pain. "Do you think it's possible?" Lydia asked, her voice barely more than a breath. "Of course," Isabel said with a small smile. "It's possible. The journey to healing is long, and it's not always linear, but it's always there. You'll find your way." Lydia's heart tightened at the thought. She had spent so many months in isolation, lost in her grief, thinking she would never see a way out. But now, as she sat in the quiet of the convent with Sister Isabel, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be immediate, but it was there, waiting for her when she was ready. As the days passed, Lydia continued to return to the convent. Each time, she found more pieces of herself emerging from the shadows of her sorrow. With Isabel's gentle guidance, Lydia began to confront the parts of herself she had lost, the parts of her identity that had been buried beneath the weight of grief. It wasn't a quick process, but it was a beginning. And though Lydia wasn't sure when, or if, she would ever fully heal, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore. Sister Isabel had given her the greatest gift of all, the gift of time, space, and understanding. And with that, Lydia began to rebuild, one step at a time. As the days passed, Lydia found herself visiting the convent more frequently. With each visit, she felt more at peace, more open, and less weighed down by the grief that had once consumed her. The quiet sanctuary of the convent had become her refuge, a place where she could heal in ways she hadn't thought possible. Sister Isabel had become more than just a listener. She had become a guide, gently helping Lydia face her past and find the strength to move forward. In turn, Isabel herself began to heal, rediscovering the warmth and kindness in her own heart that had long been buried. One evening, as the bell of the convent rang in the distance, signaling the hour, Lydia stood to leave. Before she walked away, she turned back to Isabel, her expression filled with gratitude. "Thank you," Lydia said softly, her voice sincere. "For everything." Isabel smiled, her calm presence a comforting reassurance. "Anytime. You're always welcome here." As Lydia stepped out into the fading light, Isabel stood at the door, watching her leave. In that moment, she realized that Lydia wasn't just a stranger passing through town. She was a soul in need of healing, and Isabel had been there to help her find it. Sometimes, it only takes one person, one conversation, to change the course of a life. And for Lydia, That person had been Sister Isabel.